today. Thank you for joining today's live stream. This is a live stream we do every Tuesday to cover topics related to digital transformation, ERP implementations, and all things related to digital strategy. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And today's topic, and I'll introduce our guest in just a moment, today's topic is customer-centric digital transformation strategies. We're going to talk about customer centricity, what it means, how it relates to digital transformation and ERP projects, and some of the things that you could be thinking about from a customer-centric perspective as it relates to that. Before I introduce our guest, though, just a couple of logistical items. First of all, as I mentioned, this live stream is something we do every Tuesday, same time, same place, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We also use this live recording as a segment in our upcoming Transformation Ground Control podcast. So you're getting to be part of the live production of that podcast by being here today. So thank you for that. So we'll polish this up, edit it, and make it part of the podcast that comes out a week from today. And again, that podcast is called Transformation Ground Control, which you can find on audio podcast platforms, as well as it streams to YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter every Wednesday. The other thing is we are going to take live questions today. So I have a set of questions I'm going to start with, but I'm really going to hope to turn it over to the audience as we go here and get your questions as we get going here in the conversation. So please feel free to drop in the chat wherever you're joining today. Be sure to drop in the chat any questions or comments you have for us. We'll get to those audience questions as they come in. And we're watching all the streams on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And then last but not least, if you could just drop in the chat where you're joining from today. We typically draw a global audience for these discussions, which I really love to see and love to see where everyone's from. So if you don't mind, just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from today. I'd love to get a feel for where everyone is here today. So all that being said, our guest today to talk about customer-centric digital transformation strategies is Sam Monti, who is the CFO of Epicor Software, which is a ERP software provider, which I'll let him describe in a little bit more detail. But Sam, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Eric. Glad to be joining you this morning.
Glad to have you. First time we've had a discussion in this interview format, so really appreciate you being here today. I'm looking forward to the conversation. But before we jump in and start talking about customer centricity and what it means to digital transformation and how ERP software has evolved to address that customer centricity, why don't we start with you and your background? Tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll talk about Epicor Software as well.
Oh, thanks, Eric. I'm actually in my 30th year of my professional career. Undergraduate in accounting, graduate degree in finance. Started off in corporate audit 30 years ago, but quickly moved into varying degrees of operational finance roles. I started the first 20 years of my career at 2 Fortune 500 companies. I had the privilege to work at the Sherwin-Williams Paint Company, and then to spend 15 years at Rockwell Automation. Some people know as Allen Bradley, which was part of the former Rockwell International Company. And spent 15 years there in industrial automation, and had the privilege near the end of my career there to head as the finance lead for software for Rockwell. And that brought me down to Austin, Texas, which gave me really good insight to how software engages and works within business and the importance of it. And being in Austin, naturally, it's not surprising, was introduced to the private equity environment down here. And I guess it's over 10 years ago, almost 15 years ago, left Rockwell Automation and went into private equity software technology focused. So I got my software DNA initially from my experience at Rockwell Automation. And the last 12 years, I've been focused at private equity solely on software and technology. And Epicor is the fourth company I've had the privilege to be with. Was with Mitra Tech, which was a legal management company. I was with Lithium, which was a customer care company. And in Lithium, we merged and we became Koros, which was customer care and marketing. And I had the privilege a couple of years ago to come back to my roots. My roots really are, in the industrials, complemented with software. So when the Epicor opportunity was here, it was a natural fit. It really leveraged off the first part of my career and then allowed me to index my understanding and experience within software itself. And I couldn't be happier than the last couple of years of what I've been able to experience and what I've been allowed to be a part of here at Epicor. And it's just been a great experience. It's kind of the best of both worlds. I'm a real big believer in the make, move, and sell economy, production, right, distribution, and selling. But I'm as big a believer in critical software that allows that to succeed. So that's kind of a little bio of who I am and where I came from.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to come back to the build, buy, make, move philosophy here in just a second. I want to come back to that point. So hold that thought. But I guess just real quickly before I go there, how did you alluded to this a little bit, but how was that transition going from being in industry, even though it was tech related and you're on sort of the technology side of industry, but now you're full on working for a software company now and have been for several years. But how was that transition and how did you make that transition from industry into working for a tech company? Was it pretty natural or how was it different?
I think one of my own personal assets is I'm pretty adaptable person. So I think that helped. The adjustment in the positive stance is going from public to private is the flexibility in private to really be a change agent. You can get things done in a public company, but it takes immensely longer, and you can do it quicker, more efficiently, and with more impact in a private environment. And in software, it allowed me to really see the value of recurring revenue. And then you go back into industry and they have to work hard. You've got to replace the selling of widgets every year effectively. So if you sold 1 million that year, you may have to sell 1.1 million. Software allows you to build long-term annuity type of value from a financial perspective. But then also, I think software becomes more customer-centric because you have this contract, this agreement to be there, not for 1 year, but for 10, 15, 20 years. So I think it causes you to have to index on your relationship with your customers for the long term. So I think that's what I did have to adjust to is the financial model is different, and that financial model plays into the customer centricity.
Right. And that'll be one of my first meaty questions for you is just describing what customer centricity is. But what about this? And I apologize. I know I'm probably butchering what you said as far as was it build, buy, make, move? Maybe explain that, whatever I just butchered. Maybe explain what that is and what it means to Epicor.
Yeah, no, great, Eric. So we've spent a lot of time always thinking about who we are, and that can be captured in a mission statement. So when I think about the mission statement of Epicor, our mission statement is Epicor is the essential partner to the world's most essential businesses. And we're providing a digital foundation that powers the growth of the global make, move, and sell economy. And the make, move, and sell economy is what we pride ourselves on, our eloquent way of saying the supply chain. So we have customers that make things, we have customers that move things, and we have customers that sell things. And changing in this environment, we have customers within that supply chain, make, move, and sell, that are starting to make and move, or move and make, or move and sell. So you're seeing kind of the bifurcation of the supply chain. You're seeing kind of a coalition of it. But the make, move, sell that's our definition of the supply chain, and our customers are supply chain centric.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that ERP systems and technology in general should serve a broader purpose other than just automating for automation's sake. It's about, like you said, filling those critical functions for critical essential businesses. And I think that's a good reminder of where the focus should be on these sort of technology initiatives. What about when you talk about customer centricity then, and that's really the whole thread we're going to dive into here. Maybe let's just start off with the basics here. What does it mean to have a customer-centric strategy or to be customer-centric or to build software, deploy software that is customer-centric? What does that mean to you?
What it means to me, within the seat I sit is when I think about the customer, one is it gets back to the financial model. When we're selling a SaaS or a cloud agreement, these are 5-year contracts. So it's not like after the sales process, you deliver them a quality product and then you leave. And then you hope that they buy from you a couple of years from later because you've delivered a quality product. That customer centricity is once you hand that off and your engineers start implementing that software, you better have best-in-class support because the customer is going to have needs throughout the 24/7 day. You better have engineers that implement it very well so that the software can do everything it can. You better have a software that's agile, meaning that as you develop or buy technology that you can insert in modules, they can get a hold of that technology in a seamless way. So it gets back to a CFO. I always tell our employee base, we invest back into Epicor aggressively, and we invest in this order. And it's not because the customer's last, but because it impacts the customer the best. We invest in people first. We're a software company. Product, then customer. And it's not that customers last. We actually are investing everything in the customer, because by having the best people, we develop the best products, which service the customers the best. And I think that's how I think about the relationship is a car company wants to build a good car that you and I as drivers, it's reliable, it's comfortable, it serves us well in the 5 years we have it, per se. And then that hopefully gets them the sale 5 years later. Software company can't just deliver a well-built car. It's got to deliver a well-built car that continues to become, maybe you bought an economy car that becomes a sedan, that becomes an SUV, that comes an over-the-road semi. Like you have to have that adaptability, flexibility. And that's how I think about the customer centricity. It's anchored in the financial model of software that holds you accountable for being there in that customer's journey, the life of the customer. And if you're a critical software company, you should be targeting that your relationships are no less than 20 years. When you're mission critical software, if that customer stays financially viable, this needs to be a multi-decade journey if you're really being forward thinking and you're really leaning into that relationship. And I would say Epicor original customers, they're all north of 20 years. We have newer customers because we've acquired businesses and we keep winning deals. But that's how I think about it, Eric.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes total sense. And you've been at a few different software companies now. And what do you see Epicor doing in the market, just as examples or maybe categories of innovation that focuses on customer centricity? Like, what are some of the initiatives you guys focus on internally as you're developing your people, your product, and then ultimately your customers? What are you doing, with the software to make it more customer centric?
I really appreciate that question. Epicor is a 50-year-old company. It is showing, like, I pride myself on adaptability. It's showing that same adaptability. In a football analogy is the team that makes the halftime adjustment always wins. Anybody that watched the Super Bowl, who made the halftime adjustment? It was the Kansas City Chiefs, and they won. I've seen at Epicor that adaptability. If you go back 4 or 5 years, Epicor made the commitment that they are going to be a cloud-based company. And a lot of companies will say that, and it's a lot of marketing language put out. Epicor leaned in over $800 million of investment in the last 4 or 5 years to actually take its great on-prem products and make them cloud ready. And our customers are seeing that now, because if you see our migration to cloud, the rate that we're actually growing our cloud bookings reinforces that, one, from a technology perspective, we made that commitment and upheld to it. From the people perspective is we are committed to, whether it's benefits, whether it's career opportunities, whether how we recruit in a very diverse environment, meaning that we throw out a wide net to make sure we get the people with the highest aptitude and attitude. And the fact that we are a true global company. We leverage off of the best talent that we can find globally. So I would say what I've seen at Epicor that I think is unique to a lot of companies is they make the halftime adjustment. They invested in cloud. That cloud investment is taking hold, but we're not stopping there. Now we start thinking about what is data? What is predictive analytics? How can we continue to grow the original ERP story to a point that becomes more of a proactive asset for our customers so that they can really be predictive in the market, reduce costs, be as efficient as possible, and can expand? We can scale with them. They can scale as large as they want to be, and we can scale with them. So I would say that's what I've seen as I've read the history and I've watched what's happened here the last 2 years. And then I see the financial results. The financial results are the scoreboard. And what's the old statement? The scoreboard doesn't lie. And our scoreboard's not lying. The customers are rewarding us, financially, because we've held to our commitments. But we're showing that adaptability. And that's not easy, especially when you get the companies as old as we are. You can kind of get grounded and rooted into behaviors that maybe don't age that well. And I don't think Epicor is doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, which would be easy to do if you think about it, because you've been around for so long and you've acquired all these different companies legacy companies that have been around for a while. So that's kudos to you guys in the leadership team for taking it that direction. Just to turn to the audience here real quickly. Thank you for dropping in the chat where you're joining from today. We've got people all over the world. Just a few examples: Bengaluru, India, Denver, Colorado, Horton, Norway, Atlanta, Georgia, Hampshire, UK, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Kerala, India, Naples, Florida, Scottsdale, Arizona, India, Europe, and among others. So South Africa as well. So thank you for joining and dropping in the chat where you're from. Again, if you have questions for Sam or I as it relates to customer-centric digital transformation strategies, please feel free to drop it in the chat here. And I'm actually going to pull up just a couple questions and comments that have come up so far. One is from Ajay on LinkedIn, who says, "Hey Eric, you're doing great for digital transformation, but don't restrict yourself to ERP selling only." So I just want to bring that up and thank you for the comment and the feedback. I don't sell software, just to be clear. I don't sell anything related to ERP, but I like talking about it because we advise our clients on it. That's why I have the real ERP experts like Sam on the show, because he actually works for an ERP software company. So appreciate that feedback. And then a question here from Kyler is how do organizations become more customer focused? I assume that's an investment in a culture shift. And I guess maybe we could take it from the perspective of not only maybe what you're doing at Epicor to become more customer centric, but maybe how you see your customers becoming more customer centric, and how do you get them to focus on that customer centricity versus I'm just going to automate my back office functions just because I need to. You know, how do you make that shift in thinking?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's a lot of avenues of how you make it successful. Like within the organization itself, I think the question tapped onto, you have to have a cultural change, meaning that you have to have leaders that really become evangelists of how you're thinking about the company, meaning that starts with transparency at the employee level. And we're very transparent about here's who we are, here's where we came from, here's where we're going. And to get there, this is how we're investing and what we expect out of the employees and the kind of talent we're bringing into the company, because we have this talent already. We need this talent to make sure that we're, quote unquote, Epicor 2.0. So I think you start first with leadership within the company about transparency is game number one. This is where we're going. You communicate the entire employee staff. This is our strategy and why we're doing it. And then you execute to it, meaning that what you expect out of the employees, you hold to that and you reward it. You reward the behavior. So I think you change the cultural stance with a sense of transparency. And then that has all avenues, and people rally around that when they know that they're being communicated to in a transparent, honest manner. And it doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes, but you own them and you move on from them. People rally to that. They want it to succeed. The other thing internally too is it's very hard, but try to streamline targets to a simplistic manner. Try to find North Stars. Don't have 10 objectives. Don't have more than 3. Try to find one. Like internally, we have one internal financial North Star here that the whole company understands and can rally to. And I think that's how you have to think about everything. Boil it down to an achievable target. Define success and make that success achievable, but with effort. So I would do that internally. Then externally, the customer journey is important too, is you have got to be out there with the customers, whether it's shows that you have, engagements that you have with the executives. You've got to tell them where you're going and why you're going there. And you have to get them to believe in it, but they have to be a partner in it too. Epicor, because I want to get back to something else that first statement said before the question. Epicor is 50 years old. We have customers that are invested in us as much as we're invested in them, and that they understand what our system is. You've got to give them a seat at the table, because sometimes they know the product better than you do. So you have to give them a seat at the table of, hey, we are going to cloud for these reasons, and this is why it helps you. And what does your product do now? What does your product do now that's critical? That is a showstopper that has to happen in cloud. That's an example. So I think to make that transformation, it's both internal and external. Culturally, you better have the right tone. You better be transparent and honest. Outside, it's the same thing. You better be transparent with your customers, and you better bring them along within the ride. You not dictate to them, bring them along in the ride. And you need to have patience with it too. Cloud's an example. We do not force anybody onto cloud. We have not sunsetted products that aren't cloud to force them into that. We are with our customers. And when it's ready for them financially or ready for them culturally, then we're ready to provide them the cloud experience. So I would say, how do you make it work? You go beyond the traditional ERP, which gets back to that first statement, Eric. Right. Yes, we have grown up as an ERP company, very focused in critical verticals. And we have more vertical expertise than anybody within supply chain. We are not running from what ERP is, but like that statement said, we are not our grandparents' ERP. meaning that we are built off of the DNA of ERP and we'll never run away from that because of the mission critical sense of it. But we are becoming ERP 2.3.0, meaning that we are very inquisitive about data and the digital foundation and the digital transformation. We are very inquisitive about things like business intelligence and predictive analytics. That is what the evolution of ERP is. We may not call it ERP in the future, but let's be honest, it's all built on the ERP that what our grandparents established. So we don't run from it, but we are forward looking. That statement is absolutely true. If you aren't looking at what I said, digital transformation based on a digital foundation, looking at data, looking at predictive analytics, then you will become antiquated. So I wanted to make sure I got back to that statement. We are focused on selling more than what the audience said was just ERP.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. And there's so much in what you just said that is worth emphasizing. I mean, you mentioned leadership and how there has to be a clear vision and direction for a transformation. And I think that's where a lot of companies have their first big misstep in an ERP project or a digital transformation is they don't have that clear vision, that North Star that you mentioned. This is what we're trying to accomplish. This is that future state we're trying to get to, rather than just sort of relegating or delegating the project to a project team to say, just go automate our back office systems, and because we have to replace it. The product's being sunset, so now we need to replace it. So just go replace it. That's not enough of a North Star to say this is our intent and this is what's going to guide us throughout the whole project. And you mentioned that customer journey being that potential North Star of, using that as a way to really look at how are we servicing our customers today? What are our strengths that we want to preserve? And then what can we be doing better to provide a better customer journey? And then ultimately, how can we use technology to help us get there? And I think that piece right there gets missed a lot by more organizations than I would like to admit. What are your thoughts there? Do you see companies that struggle with that, or is it hard for you guys as a software seller to convince companies that you need to do that and you need to take advantage of some of these new technologies and new potential ways of doing business?
We're not having as much trouble maybe as some do, is because we have fostered these relationships. We have customers that they know their sales rep and their support rep for a decade plus. So they trust what they're saying, but it anchors back into internally what we've touched on. It's very hard. Companies and individuals get very uncomfortable with transparency. And I go back to something, some people on this live stream may understand it or not. The cover-up's always worse than the crime. It's an old statement from the Watergate Nixon era. And what companies need to understand is transparency may feel uncomfortable at first, but once you start executing to it culturally, internally, and then with the customers, it actually becomes your greatest asset, because people are very forgiving people. If you're very transparent, and when there's bad news early is good news, you take them on that journey. So number one, you've got to establish that culturally. You've got to start sharing with your employees and then extend that to the customers. But from there, that makes it an easier story in that we drink our own champagne. Like, we have established a business intelligence organization within Epicor. We're doing all the same things we're recommending to our customers. And we're pulling down critical performance indicators within our BI team that's giving us predictive analytics of what's happening in our own ecosystem. And it becomes an easy story to tell when customers know the ERP we sell in manufacturing, I use to run this company. When I talk about business intelligence, I drink my own champagne. We live by it. We drive analytics out of it. When we start talking about predictive analytics, guess who's using predictive analytics? We are. So I think we're having a less difficult time to sell than others because, number one, we have the long-term relationship. But number two is we're acting with a sense of transparency. And then number three is we're drinking our own champagne. We're engaging in all the same practices that are going to make us relevant for the next few decades. So I would say that's how we're doing it, because then you can get into things that are table stakes. Cloud, for example. Why are you on it? There is a cybersecurity element you cannot ignore. And the analogy I always use is, to the human being, on-prem seems safer, but the on-prem is like having a good safe in your house. Being in the cloud within a provider like Azure or AWS is like having Fort Knox. It doesn't seem intuitive to people, but it's the truth. So you get into things like that are table stakes of why you go cloud. Cybersecurity, agility, adaptability, access to technology faster. But I think it all starts with that cultural conversation, Eric, that Who are you as a company and what is your relationship with the customer as a company? And it's got to be transparent. It's got to be honest. Doesn't mean both parties are going to always like what they hear, but they're going to know it's the truth. And I think that allows for confidence going forward on when you recommend why you're upselling, why they should expand, why they should invest more into you. So I'm biased. That's how I think you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great points. And Rohit on LinkedIn says that customers need to understand change management. I think that's a great point that sort of highlights or underscores your point here, which is for a lot of organizations that aren't used to thinking this way about the customer journey and the customer centricity that we're talking about, it does entail a cultural shift that requires sort of a change management, strong leadership, strong communication, the transparency, all the stuff you just talked about as more of a formalized change program that could be a way to help bend that culture to be more focused in that way too. What about this? Here's an interesting question, a couple interesting ones that have come in from the audience here. This is from YouTube, an account called Affiliates Corner. Asked the question of how do you compete if you're a smaller firm when resources are so important to results and larger companies can point to a deeper pool? So I guess this kind of gets to the whole agility. If you're in the small or mid-market, how do you accomplish all this stuff that you're talking about when you don't have the depth of resources and the breadth of resources potentially at your disposal that a larger company might?
Some of it is not to be dismissive of. Is first you got to understand who you are and who you're competing with. An example we have is Epicor services the SMB industry. We do not have a false strategy of we're going up market, but we've been winning up market organically because we get back to a small company focused on who is your customer base, what region, geography, or industry you're serving, and execute on that. Do not get distracted by the 400-pound gorilla in the room that's going to come in and win. What we've learned is since we stay focused, hyper-focused on the verticals we grew up in the SMB area and the regions that we know, the bigger players try to come down with us and they lose every time because we don't get distracted by who they are. We stay focused on what we're trying to do. So I think a smaller company that has limited resources needs to leverage the technology they have as much as they can to gain the efficiencies to invest, but stay hyper-focused every day on who are you, who do you serve, what region are you in. The other stuff will take care of itself organically. Eric, I'm a big fan of boxing and I love boxing history. And there's an old statement: if you go into a fight looking for a knockout, you will get knocked out. If you go into a fight and you execute your strategy, you are likely to knock out the opponent. It's the same thing. Stay focused on who you are, the customers you serve, focus the investment on that. Leverage technology to gain dollar bandwidth, cash flow bandwidth, so that you can expand and grow more, whether it's better people, whether it's better equipment, et cetera. I think you have to stay focused on that. Be realistic to the threats out there from the bigger ones, but don't get overswallowed by, we have a big budget, Eric, but my budget is not that big when I think about some of the names not to be mentioned.
Right.
And it doesn't distract us from 1 minute when you look at the growth and what we're doing, because we know who we are and we know who we serve. And I would recommend that to know who you are, know who you serve, and make sure who you serve knows that. That's how you do. Stay focused on who you are.
Yeah. And the good thing about being a smaller mid-market company is that you have more options. I mean, I feel like small and mid-market companies have more viable options in the market in some ways because you don't necessarily need the big, massive, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, even though you didn't want me to mention them by name. But you don't necessarily need them. You can go find a targeted solution like in one of the Epicor products that focuses on a certain vertical or a certain function. And there's others out there too. There's a lot of kind of mid-tier solutions that can do that. So I think that's a really good point.
Eric, you leveraged off too is I love our customer base in SMB. I'm biased about it. I love history. I love how things work. SMB is 80% of the economy.
Yeah.
Whatever free trade country you go to. Like, it's not the big names we all think of. They're less than 20% of the US economy, North America, Europe, et cetera. The SMB is where the real working man and woman is. It's who's actually moving the economy. And that's why we were serving the essential businesses. And for example, during COVID, none of our customers shut down. They were considered essential because they actually were moving the goods that allowed all of us to adapt to whatever regulations there were. And that's why I'm very biased in it. It gets back to that first question. I'm proud that we serve SMB. I think that's where smart money is. And I think that's where smart business is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, here's sort of a trend-based question from Ryan on LinkedIn, and I love this question. I'm gonna have to hide it to read the whole thing, but I'll start it here. Ryan on LinkedIn says, speaking of the future, AI has been all over the news lately with programs like Chat, GPT, and likewise. How do you see ERP systems evolving in a future that may require less human power from your customers and potentially more AI automations? And he goes on to say, and you can't see it on the screen here, or have I been watching too much Terminator? So
I know, right, Ryan? It all starts reflecting the first two Terminators, the real ones.
right.
Here's how we think about it. AI, to say AI, machine learning is not relevant, of course it's relevant. Here's how we're adapting it within ERP. It's starting with the data, and it's why we're inquisitive in business intelligence. And we personally are sitting on Mount Everest of data. So I think how AI will impact ERP and machine learning will be who monetizes the immense amount of data the best, meaning that with companies like ours find a way through the digital transformation, the data is all out there. How does it start playing initially with your business intelligence technology? Our business intelligence builds off predictive analytics that we're working on. But if the predictive analytics are only going to be as good as how much data the machine and the coding has to work with. So I think ERP is going to get influenced by AI, ML, whatever the flavor of the month is of the technology, by who manages the data the best and allows the customer to see the efficiencies they gain from that. And that's how I think ERP is going to transform. Effectively, we have a business intelligence tool. When it starts pulling from a repository of terabytes of data, what can that distribution center in Columbus, Ohio predict using all that data on the flow of goods? What can U.S. Lumber predict on how much lumber it wants to produce and push out there? What can a steel manufacturer do? That's how I think ERP is really going to leverage off technology. And that's why we're built off ERP, but ERP 2.0, 3.0 is going to have that predictive analytics aspect, I think, which is going to leverage off AI, machine learning. But it's only going to be relevant if there's a wealth of data to pull from. Because you could have the greatest code ever, but if it's pulling from a repository of no data, what does that code actually do?
Right.
That's how this CFO sees it.
Right. No, it's a great point. And then this is sort of building back on the previous thread about the small and mid-sized market. And I'll flip this into a question. It's a comment from Mohammed on LinkedIn. And he says, our organization is going through digital transformation from legacy system to Infor M3. The more configuration changes for small companies is taking more time, money, and confidence. So I guess just to maybe turn that into a question, do you see technology in general becoming more complex? I mean, there's more business value, presumably, or potentially. But is it at the same time, and back to Ryan's question about Chat GPT and AI and all that stuff, is it getting too complex in some ways for small and mid-market companies or organizations in general? Or do you think organizations are figuring out how to adapt to some of those technological advances?
Yeah, I don't. I think it's all how the user is using it. And I think what we're seeing, why have ERP implementations have such a bad reputation, they take forever, and that it comes from one, you're either working with somebody's code that just needs a ton of professional services, but more times than not, these projects are bogged down because people allow the introduction of customization. I've been a part of 3 business operational standard solution overturns at companies, and we've had to do them because they've had the right vendors. The execution of it was wrong. The architecture of what they were trying to do was wrong. And then they let everybody have their customization in. You've got to try to, number one, you start with as much of the project needs to be done out of the box. You need to be willing to give away some customization. If you don't, technology will drown you. It will come inefficient. Project will bleed you from the integration. And the thing doesn't become scalable or sustainable. You get to a very customized, it could be an off-the-shelf known. It gets so customized, it might as well have been a third-party, like bespoke program that was built by engineers on site.
Right.
What I've learned in all these cases is we stay very rigorous. We're doing it here right now. We stay very rigorous about customization being allowed into the process. We don't allow it. And then on top of it, when you do these projects, you have to have the functional or operational owners, the end users of that. They have to be in the project. defining what they want it to do and look like. And then they have to be controlled from customizing it. If you do not do that, technology, even from the 80s, will overrun a company. So it's not because our stuff is shinier and better and thinks faster. It's really the discipline of how you project manage. And I would just say, word to the wise, reduce the customizations. These are not hills to die on. People get emotional about them, but when you really drive down to it, they don't. There's other ways to do it that are usually right out of the box. That would be my 2 cents worth of how you control it. But I've lived through 3 of them, and that's why we've been successful. Functional operational owners minimized customization to almost 0.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gets back to the point that one of the audience members mentioned about change management. If you don't manage change well, you're going to see more attempts to customize the software. It's usually a symptom of resistance to change. Oftentimes, or sometimes I should say, there is legitimate need to customize, but that should be more of an exception. It's when you, like you said, when you start to over customize, it's usually not because the software isn't working the way it should or doesn't work. It's because your people are resisting the change and they're not used to it. It doesn't look like the way I do things today, so therefore I want to change it to look like the way I do things today.
No, well said, Eric. Because you run into people that have grown up as knowledge columns and pillars, and then they start becoming knowledge experts, and they unintentionally become knowledge terrorists. I mean, if they win the lottery tomorrow, your company's in a lot of hurt because all this knowledge is in here, and that's you'll find the human characteristic. Those become the customization evangelists, and you've got to you've got to get them comfortable that you're moving to something, and we expect them to be the knowledge experts on this new thing. We are not customizing.
Right. I love that term. Can I borrow that from you? Knowledge terrorist. I think I'm going to start using that.
And they weaponize information. They weaponize data.
Yeah, and hold it hostage. I've got all this tribal knowledge in my head. I'm not giving it up. Because it threatens my job or it threatens my job security.
And that's where the transparency always plays in. Humans are just humans. They're good people. If you're transparent with them, you can get them past that, and then they become an unbelievable asset in the journey.
Yeah. So with software in general, and as well as Epicor software specifically, what are some of the ways that you see manufacturing and distribution types of organizations and other essential businesses in the world economy? What are they doing to become more customer centric? Like, what are some of the technologies or functions that they might be using? And just to give you an example of one that I know is a strength of Epicor's products is when you think about that product configuration function that you guys have, and a smaller subset of software vendors provide really good product configuration capabilities to help sales reps to go out and sell offerings that make sense and can actually flow into manufacturing and give you an accurate estimate process up front. And that's very customer facing. And that's, to me, that's sort of a function or a capability that you can build within an organization to have sort of a tangible impact on being customer centric. But what are some ways that you're seeing manufacturing or just organizations in general become more customer centric? What sorts of capabilities or technology functions are they deploying?
What I'm seeing is, and it's not to, there are some good things that came out of COVID, and I know that sounds sacrilegious. The supply chain got a wake up call, and basic supply chain 101 is you don't single source your supply chain. Well, guess what? The world was single sourcing, and we all learned a really hard lesson. So what we're seeing happen from a macro standpoint is the regionalization of supply chains, which, I'm biased, is a best practice in supply chains. It makes South America better, the US, Canada, Europe better. And it makes supply chains more efficient. So we're seeing a couple things happen. We're seeing our customers adjusting to the supply chain constraints we saw out of COVID, and they're getting more thoughtful about where are their physical assets and locations. Within that, they're having to leverage off, like you said, product configurators, et cetera. They're having to leverage off technology such as Epicor to understand who's on first, what's on second. So I'm seeing, number one, an onshore and regionalization of supply chains to kind of address what happened during COVID. But then from there, they can sell more efficiently. They can sell, it'll help them work against inflation, et cetera, some other issues. We are seeing them embrace technology at an accelerated rate, meaning migrating to SaaS is accelerating at 2x what it was before COVID for us. And the reason they're doing that is they're seeing technology about what does the product configurator do within the cloud environment now that they've also offered a business intelligence product. They've now offered, if you're in manufacturing, a configure product and quote product. We're seeing the customers embrace technology a lot quicker. And I think a lot of it comes out of what we learned in COVID. They are being forced into regionalization. And it's not just business as you do lately, but we are getting a lot of questions. For example, we acquired Grow, and it's our future of business intelligence. We're getting a lot of questions. When is it going to be ready? So like we're launching an integrated version into our distribution product, and right after that into our kinetic manufacturing product, to show you that my thesis is right about the regionalization and the embrace of technology. They are knocking down our door about when can I have screens up in my factory or distribution center that put out of the box business intelligence cards from your product that allow me to move or make goods faster. So what I'm seeing is even when the economy gets softer, we haven't seen a slowdown in pipeline because customers are working through backlog. They're also transforming who they are from a geographic landscape, and they're also using this time to introduce new technology. So I'm seeing an embrace of technology to address all those issues. And then from the macro standpoint, we're on the favorable side of what I see occurring, the regionalization of supply chain demand. And then finally within there, these customers, I hinted to it later, they're looking at other ways to make money, and manufacturers are starting to distribute. Manufacturers are starting to sell private label. Distributors are deciding to go into some private label manufacturing. We are seeing a blending of what's happening from that make, move, and sell economy, that where you have manufacturer, distro, et cetera. So if you have that, you better have an ERP that's scalable and sustainable. You know, my sales pitch here is, hey, who's grown up in the make, move, and sell economy in the verticals? Well, Epicor has. We can make things for you. Oh, you want to distribute them? Well, we've been doing distribution for 50 years too. So we're seeing it across the boards. Management's getting very adept at adjusting to what's happened in the environment, and they're not turning around. Just because things have calmed down, I think people have learned their lesson. They're never going back to it.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it gets back to your earlier point about you want to buy technology that you can, I think you said something along the lines of you could start off it being more of a sedan, and then it evolves into a bigger sedan, and then an SUV, and then a semi. So, you need, with the world changing as fast as it is as a result of COVID and more vertical integration and regionalization of supply chains and a lot of the stuff you're talking about, you need technology that can roll with the punches and that you can grow into and evolve with. And I think that's a really good point. Another piece of customer centricity, though, if we talk about specific technologies, is CRM. So if you look at customer relationship management and Salesforce automation, that's another technology that's very customer facing. And oftentimes that's the first experience that a customer has with your organization. And I know that you guys at Epicor have recently built a partnership with Salesforce, which is a leading CRM provider, obviously focused on customer-centric customer experience and as well as sales and general CRM. But tell us about this partnership between Epicor and Salesforce. Why did you guys do it? And then what does it mean to your customers and their digital transformations?
No, absolutely. Salesforce, my perspective, phenomenal partner in the sales process. And the reason I say that is, second to none, there is only one CRM product. In my mind, in my world, there's only one, and it's Salesforce. And the reason I say that is, and I'm really sensitive about it with an SMB, because you get into SMB, and if a customer, not all customers require a CRM, but most do. I think a lot of people in SMB think about Salesforce and they think too much car. It's not. That Salesforce as a product, I start with why we have the relationship, scales up and down, very agile. It can do for small what it does for enterprise. It's just you're buying a different car. So it does flex up and down. We wouldn't be on the journey with them if we thought it was going to hurt our customers in the SMB. It will help them. We use Salesforce as a CRM, and quite honestly, we're re-implementing it now as part of what I was telling you about how do you implement products. The reason it's critical and the reason they're important, we get around the data. And you talk about CRM being done right. You talk about a data repository that we want any of our customers to have. You now know where all your customers are, who they are, what's up for renewal, What are their pain pressures? What's their customer rating? So I see Salesforce as a very valuable partner in this journey because it does scale, like I said. But when you get into the technology aspect of it, when you implement Salesforce correctly, just like when you implement us correctly, you have a tool that is a game changer. I've used it at 3 software companies. It has changed how we have sold, and has changed the value recognition, and it has improved the bandwidth of the sales and marketing team. And it has allowed, like marketing, for example, to get hyper aggressive about pipeline fulfillment. That's why they're in the journey with us. When you want CRM, people think about CRM, I think they think about it the wrong way. CRM really needs to be how you manage the customer's life through the entire journey with your company, which means you better have a lot of data, and that data better be very accessible, intuitive to the people that use it. So I go into SMB. I am a big proponent of, if you need CRM, there's only one choice. It is our partner. It is Salesforce. And Salesforce plays brilliantly with our ERP technology offerings. But I would get back to that, even forget us as, collaborative here for a second. You need it because you need to manage the customer relationship journey of all your customers, just like you need to manage the data relationship of all your production, distribution, and selling. You can't do that if you don't have a world-class CRM product. Salesforce is the world-class CRM product. It'll make your salespeople better. It'll make your business development reps better. It'll give your data when you're in renewals or discussions with customers. You will be more in time, so they don't feel like you don't even know who they are. That's why they're a logical partner in this journey. That the CRM, I don't know how you can be successful without world-class CRM and world-class ERP. And then they come together, they both are feeding data, which gets back to that question, AI, ML. You want to talk about another data repository. If you have the whole sales customer relationship journey of your customers on top of how things are made and moved and sold, then you have all the data you're ever going to need. Now, how are you using it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It makes total sense. And a follow-up question here, which I love because it opens up another Pandora's box or another can of worms, depending how you look at it. But that it's sort of the best of breed versus single ERP debate or discussion. And this is from Kyler on LinkedIn, who's part of the Third Stage team and also my podcast co-host. So she has a different perspective here. And her perspective is interesting. Leveraging an existing CRM software like Salesforce, we often see vendors try to build their own and trap customers into a bundle. And I think this is a really interesting point and question for you because it does point to the fact of when you're defining your digital strategy, oftentimes you have to make trade-offs. You have to decide, do I really want a single integrated ERP system that does everything I need just straight out of the box, same vendor, same product or whatever, knowing that I'm potentially going to water down some functions like potentially CRM as an example? Or do I trade that off and say I'm going to provide a better customer experience with a world-class CRM, someone that presumably has done it better? Salesforce has created a CRM system better than most ERP vendors, I'd argue, and that's why they're successful, is because they really focused on CRM to start, and they made a better mousetrap than what ERP vendors could. But now you've shifted some risk now and said, well, it's a little bit more technical complexity now, because now you've got 2 systems, you've got to tie it together. And you mentioned that Salesforce integrates brilliantly with Epicor. And today's integration tools, I think, do make it easier to integrate multiple systems in general. So it's not as bad as it was 10 or 20 years ago. But it still raises the question of, is it better to have a single ERP system that is fully integrated, or do you want to have that best of breed, best in class sort of model to where you can provide a better customer experience? And how do you recommend organizations navigate that trade-off, or what would your advice be to them as they try to think through that decision process?
No, Kyler, I appreciate it. That's a great question. And I have a real strong conviction on it. My father was an Air Force officer for 30 years, and I love planes and I grew up around them. And the one thing you learn is just go look at when the US government tried to build one plane that did everything, and look at what that plane was. Like, it's a disaster, right? And I look at ERP the same way. When somebody tells you can do everything, it's a fool's errand. It gets back to that question of small to large. Know who you are. We are best in breed provider of ERP with the digital foundation. And knowing that is, when I was at Rockwell, they went through a massive ERP implementation, and it took longer than it should have, and it cost 3 times more than it should have. And when they were done, they had a real strict rule. Nothing is to be used for everything except the ERP provider. So if you need CRM or if you need professional services, I was down in the software division. We weren't doing that. We were, for example, our professional services, we were using OpenAir, and our CRM, we were using Salesforce. The rest of the company started seeing like our CRM system, and the sales team started screaming, why don't I have that? And Rockwell learned a lesson. Best in breed is how you win. Centered around the ERP, you build an ecosystem. And it doesn't mean you just add on endlessly. You have to have a rationale why it is really better than what the ERP may offer. If you build best in breed around ERP, you are maximizing the efficiency of the organization. And we know who we are. There's a lot of functionality. You should stay with Epicor. Best in breed for a CRM system, for the scale of what our customers are looking for, it is Salesforce. It's not us. We know who we are. We're the software that is running the company, but I'm not the software that's going to manage the customer relationship our customer has with their customers optimally. It's best in breed is, instead of trying to build the plane that does everything, you build the best air superiority fighter, or you build the best bomber. You don't build this plane does everything bad.
Right. Or yeah.
I think it's in that analogy, in that we integrate well with best in breed, but don't be fooled by us. We are best in breed in the things that are critical to running the company, whether you're a manufacturer, distributor, or seller.
Right. And it gets back to what you said before about customization and what we were talking about, how when you customize, there might be some customization that's critical, and there might be some customization that's more of a symptom of resistance to change. And I would say the same can be true or be said of best of breed, in that Salesforce, for example, might be a viable strategic option to deploy as a best of breed CRM solution that does CRM better than ERP systems. But there might be other examples in an organization where it's not necessarily that best of breed does things materially better. It's just you're resisting the change. You're resisting that core ERP system. The organization's resisting it, or part of the organization's resisting it. So they want to go off and get their own technology for HR or supply chain or whatever, whatever function it is. And that you have to watch that. You have to know, back to your earlier point about leadership and having that guiding star, that North Star, you have to have that clear vision and strategy of what it is you're trying to accomplish so that you can navigate those sorts of decisions. Because you'll inevitably have people that want to over customize or want to have another bolt on that you don't need. And so I think that's the tricky part that a lot of people struggle with. They're looking for an easy answer of either or. Either it's single system or it's best of breed. There's no in between, but there is an in between. And I think that's what you're saying.
That's absolutely it. And look, we even live by it. When we implemented Salesforce for our CRM, does Salesforce by default get everything in CRM? No, but we will do a best in breed on top of them if we have to, but it's got to get past that threshold. If Salesforce does 80% or more of what I need that function or module to do, then you stay with it. And it's the same with your ERP system. If they do it, the rule is if they do it 80% as good or more as the best specific, caveat provider, then you stay in-house. You avoid the customization, and 80% is good enough. But to get best in breed, some of those things, is there another CRM product that does Salesforce at 80% as good in most situations? No.
Right.
And like I said, is there somebody that does ERP 80% as good as us or better? No. And that's why you go with the best in breed. But my view of the ecosystem, the old Steve Jobs view, is the sun of the universe is your ERP. And then around that are the planets. And you do the best in breed around that. And some of those best in breeds will actually be stuff that your ERP company does own or did create. And then other planets are going to be inorganic. They're going to be other best in breed practices. And that, I kind of look at it like that, from like an ecosystem. Start with the ERP, go best in breed, but like you said, be disciplined. If they're just doing it because they have a non-defensible customization, then you don't do it.
Right. And that's where the business case comes into, if you're going to invest a little bit extra for best of breed, is it delivering enough business value to justify that added cost, that added risk, the added complexity of having a bolt on? So I think I think there's too much hyperbole in the market today to where you have people that they've dug in their heels on a certain position, that single ERP system is good or single ERP system is bad. It's either good or bad. It's sort of like we have to pick a side, and they don't recognize that gray area and then it becomes very difficult to navigate that if you don't have that guiding star that you were talking about earlier.
And that's exactly what happened at Rockwell. But then once you have the largest portion of the sales team seeing what the sales individuals in my business could do, was they were using Salesforce, and the rest of the company was using SAP CRM. And it was,
right.
They were wasting sales cycles. They didn't have data. They couldn't get things done. They couldn't enter stuff properly. And once that bubbled up to senior management, they saw, then they repivoted and they said, we're going to go best in breed. But they were very disciplined like we are here. That means, like you said, all the things about customization. It doesn't mean we're going to pile on and go back to a spaghetti plate, because you got to, avoid that. Like if you're really well, I have a rule of 7. Like if you have more than really 7 critical systems in a company of scale, then you may have a spaghetti plate type of thing going on. People are just bolting things on, and it gets out of control, and you end up having to have a deconstruct a decade later.
Right. Yeah, great point. And this is from Kyler, our podcast co-host here. It says Samuel wins the Ground Control Best Analogy Award. I would have to agree with that. I didn't know there was a Best Analogy Award, but apparently you won it with all the analogies here today. And it is very helpful actually to paint that picture using those analogies. So, so one last question I'll ask as we sort of wrap up here is I know you've mentioned a few of these trends that are emerging in the space, in the technology space as it relates to customer centricity. You mentioned, obviously we talked about CRM. We talked about product configuration. We talked about predictive analytics. Are there any other technologies or trends to be aware of, or that should be really top of mind as it relates to the whole customer-centric digital strategy concept we're talking about here today?
I mean, there's stuff that could be way forward leading, but we're keeping a discipline of what matters to us. It centers around the blocking and tackling. Is we keep thinking about our cloud operations. And then what does cloud operations mean? And then is that scalable, sustainable with our customer needs? And then that's what gets into, we are hyper-focused on how we think about the business intelligence and the predictive analytics and what AI is going to mean to that. But it gets back to the not take our eye off the ball, Eric. We are hyper-focused on what is data and what does data mean? And then from there, I think the technology will be ancillary, meaning that you'll define what it means and the need for it. Technology will figure out then, a monetization or use of it. So I'm trying to go the opposite direction of it. What do we think is important? Well, obviously, being there for our customers every day is important, and it can scale and sustain is important. But within that, I go the different direction. I look at data is so important. So why is it important? We understand why it's important. Well, how are you going to unlock that importance? And that's when the technology comes in. And that's why I say AI and ML and business intelligence will be important, because I think those are just tools that unlock that value there. And hopefully that answers your question. I kind of look at it in reverse.
Yeah. Well, I like that answer a lot, actually, because it sort of, I think first of all, it's a realistic answer. I think that's the reality of boots on the ground, frontline digital transformations in organizations in general. I think too often they're too enamored by immature bells and whistles that sound good in theory, but don't really support their broader strategy and direction. So I think having more mature, established technologies that do support your overall digital strategy, your overall business strategy, I think that's well said. You want to be on the cutting edge, and you want to know what's happening and what's on the horizon. Obviously, you want to keep looking ahead, but the reality of where you are today you may not be quite ready for, AI and machine learning, for example. But it may be that that's part of your longer term roadmap, is to get the fundamentals in place first. Then you start bringing in AI and machine learning. For example, if you don't have good data, if you don't have a good master data management discipline, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good to start looking at AI and machine learning, because your data sucks. So fix the data, figure out how to clean that up and get discipline around that. Then you start to introduce AI and machine learning. So I think that's well stated. And I think that's a good strategy, is really focus on kind of your core and the core, guiding star, to keep using your analogy from before.
No, that's good. And we use that discipline within our acquisition strategy as well.
Yeah. Very good. Well, good. Well, I appreciate you being here today, Samuel. It's a very good conversation. I enjoyed it. It's a new topic that we haven't covered in this live stream or podcast before. So I really appreciate you suggesting it as a topic and for being here today.
Thanks, Eric. It's actually a great and invigorating way to start my day. And hey, I forgot to tell you happy Valentine's Day.
Yes, I realized that halfway through the conversation too. I said I didn't even wish the audience or you happy Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Hope you have, if you do celebrate Valentine's Day, hope you're spending it with someone you love or like or want to be around. So thanks for joining this as part of your day here today. So thanks to the audience for the great questions too. Really appreciate that. Great engagement and questions as always. Again, you can find this live stream every Tuesday, same time, same place. This recording will become part of Transformation Ground Control podcast that gets released actually in 2 weeks. I said a week. Usually it's a week, but we have a production situation where it's actually going to be 2 weeks this week. So it'll be 2 weeks from tomorrow. You'll see the polished episode be released on Transformation Ground Control. So be sure to check that out as well. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you next time.